So my spiritual reading this morning, my non-biblical reading, comes from some writings by the Reverend Steve Ernest Holmes. When we face a new situation, our temptation is often to ask, what do I like? Do I like this new thing? Do I like these people? Do I like this setup? Sometimes that's a helpful question to ask. But it's always good to ask, what can I learn from this new thing? In this new life situation? On this new day, what can I learn? In this moment, like it or not, life is giving me the opportunity to learn more about the universe and about myself. Everything is a teaching, a chance to learn and practice. It's a gift, but only if I stay open and curious. Even if it's a rotten situation, 9 times out of 10, curiosity beats misery. Compassion always covers the rest.
And our scripture reading this morning is from Romans chapter 7, verse 15. I don't understand what I do, for I don't do the things I want to do, but rather the things I hate.
Remember, Paul wrote that, not Scott. Would you pray with me? Holy One, we recognize ourselves in that short passage. And so as we consider curiosity this morning, help us to be curious about ourselves, to ask ourselves the tough questions, the deep questions that might bring us closer to wholeness. May the words of my mouth and the meditations of each of our hearts be filled with your light and your wisdom. Amen. I do not understand what I do because I don't do the things I want to do, but rather the things I hate. So I have to assume that from that little bit of chuckling, that sounded familiar to at least a few of you. Because we've all been there, right? We've all done something we knew we shouldn't have done. Or something happened in a way that we really didn't want, we didn't intend, and yet somehow it happened anyways. Can you give me an example? Something that may have happened to you or somebody you know that wasn't what you wanted, but what you hated, and it ended up happening anyways. Or maybe you've never done that. Maybe now you're too afraid to say anything. Amanda.
Lacked compassion when dealing with a difficult student I knew was going through a hard time.
Okay. Lacked compassion when dealing with a difficult student who was going through a hard time. Clarice.
Just being angry with my children.
Being angry with your children when you would hope that wouldn't have been your response, I'm assuming. What else? Sure.
Being judgmental, when I'm trying really hard not to be judgmental, but there it is.
Being judgmental when we're trying hard not to be. And if we look close enough, darn it, it's right there, isn't it? Yeah.
Trying to create something and it doesn't come out the way you wanted it.
Trying to create something and it doesn't come out the way you wanted it. I'm thinking sometimes it's even, we give into peer pressure. When somebody wants us to do shots at a wedding. Sometimes it's eating that second chocolate cupcake when we only needed one. Or maybe we didn't need any at all. Sometimes it's a knee-jerk reaction. And we let something slip that, gosh darn it, we regret it right afterwards, right? We've all had those times where we don't, almost just don't understand ourselves because we know in our heads what we really want to be doing, and then we go and do the exact opposite anyways. I think Paul, in saying this line, was on the verge of like this great moment of personal growth. But did he take it? And frankly, darn it, I don't think he did. I read through that one line in context. Yeah, Romans chapter 6 through 8. And what Paul does is he says, sometimes I don't get myself because I'm always doing the thing I hate instead of the thing I want to do. But he said, I figured it out. It's not my fault. Gosh darn it. It's that thing, sin. And sin comes because I'm in this body. I'm having this experience of the flesh. And then he tries to work this all out. And he says, but because we've been baptized, we have participated in the death and resurrection of Jesus, which means that we've died to our old life and we can now live into this new life in the Spirit, which is outside of our flesh and our body, which is causing us to sin. So if you ever want to do a whole lot of circular arguments and things that make no sense, read Romans 6 to 8. That was the best I could do with it. Which is why you didn't get any more than the one line that makes sense to all of us. I don't understand why I don't do what I want to do, but why I do what I hate. We all, again, struggle with this. There is no magic formula to fixing it. Baptism is not going to fix it. Communion is not going to fix it. Sorry, sitting here on a Sunday morning isn't going to fix it. Giving to the poor, volunteering, believing a certain thing isn't going to fix it. Isn't going to make us suddenly behave perfectly the way we want to behave in all circumstances. What we need is to be more self-aware. And to be more self-aware, we need to be curious about ourselves. We need to start asking ourselves, why? Why did I give in to peer pressure? Why did I eat the second cupcake? Why was I judgmental? Why did I yell at my kids? Why did I whatever? Why did I let that first thing slip out of my mouth without thinking? We need to be curious about those things, and not in a self-condemning, shame on us, judgmental sort of way to ourselves. That's not what I'm saying. It's about being curious. Gosh, I wonder why I have these reactions. I wonder why I'm angry or afraid or frustrated or worried or losing my cool. We have to dig into it and dig deeper. If we really want a shot at living in the Spirit, as Paul says, if we want a shot at finding peace within, if we want a shot at continually being better and better people, and this is a never-ending life game, folks. This is not like something we all do overnight. This is something we continue to work on because we're not perfect. There's this whole concept of, we've all heard of out-of-body experiences, right? Where you have like visions and lights and all cool stuff. And there's some, I think, sense that really that's the coolest it can get, is to get out of this body that causes us to do bad things, as Paul would say, and dwell only in the Spirit. But what the spiritual path really is an in-the-body experience. It says that we dwell in this form, in this life, that our minds, our bodies, our spirits are all connected And we need to work with all of them together toward healing and more wholeness, toward being the people that we want to be. So let me tell you a story a friend of mine relayed just not that long ago. She said that, she's roughly my age. Her parents live Madison area. She talks about how every time she talks to her parents on the phone, the two of them get on the phone together, they start arguing with each other. And this is nothing new, right? So they get into this massive argument while she's on the phone, and she's starting to feel anxious and angry and frustrated and triangulated. And she said for years, she just let this eat her up as she's on the phone. And then finally, she talked to her life coach about it. And in being curious about her reaction to it, she discovered that what happened when her parents started arguing is that she went back to her 10-year-old self, who always heard her parents arguing. And you know how we feel at 10 when our parents are arguing, right? We're powerless, we're scared, we don't know what to do, we're hurt. And so every time on the phone, she went back to that place. With the help of her life coach, she was able to now look at that a different way, to understand why she responds the way she responds, and now to choose a different way to respond. So now when her parents start arguing on the phone, she's like, guys, I don't think I need to be a part of this. I'll call you back in a little while, right? And she sets a boundary, and she gets out of the middle of it. Because she was curious about herself, curious enough to talk to somebody who could help her walk through it and talk through it. What makes it hard to be curious about ourselves and what's going on in us? Right.
Hard to be objective.
It's hard to be objective. True. What else? Clarice?
We want to blame it on the other person.
It's much easier to blame it on the other person.
You're afraid of what you're gonna find out.
You're afraid of what you're going to find out. Yeah, Karen.
Our ego gets in the way.
Our ego gets in the way of just about everything. What else? Why don't we want to be curious about ourselves? Anything else? Amanda?
Afraid of how hard it could be to change it or fix it or.
Absolutely. We all love change. And if actually we know what's going on, we might have to do something about it.
I was gonna say we're also our own worst critic.
We are our own worst critic. Absolutely. So we don't tend to look at ourselves with compassion and grace and kindness. And you know what they say, how you treat yourself is also how you treat other people when you look real close. And I know sometimes people want to argue with me about that being the other way around, but I'm not always convinced. And it's just plain hard. It takes work to be curious about what's going on with me when I'm getting angry or frustrated or overly concerned. It takes work because clearly I was right in the first place. I don't see why I need to analyze this, right? So, a man by the name of Arturo Bejar was a chief engineer at Facebook for a while. And part of his job was to deal with the complaints that came in from Facebook users. Now you know how big Facebook is. So he said it didn't take very long for there to be 1 million complaints filed. So it was easy to take the tactical ones, right, and just hand them off to the engineering staff. But he said the majority of them were issues of personal interaction between people. He said, and they were involving all kinds of feelings like hurt and blame and resentment and anger and all this sadness and all this stuff, and he had to figure out what to do with all of this. So he started off that Facebook would send out their sort of generic rubber-stamped legal response. Well, we will take down the picture if it is lewd or lascivious or copyrighted or illegal, right? And of course, that was not satisfactory to most of the folks. So he realized that he had to somehow get people to start talking to one another. There's a concept. Talking to one another to try and resolve these issues. Then he realized they didn't know how to do that. So he said, okay, you have to kind of lay it out. I want you to contact the person that you have an issue with and let them know what your concern is. And he said he realized he had to take it deeper. He said, and tell them how it made you feel. Well, he really quickly found out that people couldn't identify their feelings very well. And then he had to help them to identify what was going on with them. So he sent them like a list of emoticons. If you look like this, you're feeling angry. If you look like this, you're feeling sad. So that people could start to recognize what was going on with them. And then once they said, well, I have this concern and this is how I feel, and he said, then you need to follow it up with a question. Why did you post this? What was your intent? Turns out about 85% of those complaints were solved by people just using this format, this process. He was basically encouraging people to be curious about themselves. Why is it triggering you, right? And then let's be curious about why this person posted it. And so often the offender would say, oh, I thought that was a really nice picture of you, but now that I learned that you don't like that picture of you, of course I'll take it down. Oh, I thought it'd be fun to post something about your kids, but, if that's a problem, then of course I'll take it down. So being curious about ourselves. Curious about what's going on with us. Curious enough to start to ask questions not only of ourselves, but of others. He kind of said, it's pretty amazing he gets to do emotional intelligence work and conflict resolution with 950 million people. So one last story. This story is about a woman who eventually, after about 30 years, decided that she needed to work on a response that she was having within herself, and she didn't want to have control in her life anymore. And it wasn't as easy a situation as, hey, they posted a picture about me that I don't like. This was a trauma response. And yet she finally got to a place where she became curious enough to find a way to work through it so she could live a freer life. So at 9 years old, she was severely burned by a gas fire. Lesia was her name. Severely burned by a gas fire. And so, as is perfectly reasonable and understandable, she became very afraid of fire, and specifically anything that had to do with gas. So if she was eating at somebody's house and they left the gas grill on while they were having dinner, she would start to sweat, right? So she did this for 30 years, dealing with this intense fear about fire. And then she finally woke up one day and she felt like what she had to do was to walk back into the fire to replace that one-time horrible memory with something else. And so she talked to the local fire department and managed to get them to set up a controlled fire. They decked her out in fireproof gear, and she walked into it. And she said she stood there, and at first, that fear was present for her. It was all that she could feel, but as she stayed there and she realized that she wasn't being burned, that she was okay, she said that fear started to melt away. And she could see the world beyond the flames. And she said she held her hand out. She could watch the flames as they went around her fingers and not burn her. And when she walked back out, she could feel the heat part and then close behind her. And as she stepped out, she felt, that her heart that had been so constricted and so closed up for so long just had this sense of relief and expansion. I know that's an extreme example, but the metaphor is also there. That sometimes we have fires burning within us that we need to work through in order to get through them, to get out of them, to live whole again. Part of our curiosity becomes, what are the fires that are maybe burning in us that have had a hold on us for years and years and years, that we need to finally find a way to get through. And maybe sometimes it takes therapy to get through them. So be it. The spiritual journey is really a psychotherapeutic journey because we are connected, body, mind, and spirit. It is a journey where when we heal one part of us, we heal all of us. And so the curiosity about ourselves, and sure, I'm talking about, mental stuff mostly this morning, but there's what's going on with us physically too. I know too many people who refuse to go to a doctor. Same thing, don't want to know the answer, right? But it's the curiosity that we need to have in order to get well, to be healed, to find answers. I encourage it about every part of our lives. It is part of how we're spiritually whole. Amen.